Welcome to the Scholar's Chair. Our focus is a book entitled The Message, written by well-known author and former national correspondent at The Atlantic, Ta-Nehisi Coates. To introduce the book
is author and educator Dawud Abdur-Rahman.
I want to give a brief biography of him, just because I think it's relevant. Is that he has family roots in the Eastern Shore of Maryland. He was raised in West Baltimore. His father, Paul Coates, was a very prominent person generally in his life. He was a librarian in Howard. He was at Howard University. He was a member of the Black Panthers. He fostered a strong Afrocentric and politically conscious environment at home. He was a Vietnam War veteran, and he was a former founder of Black Classic Press, which was dedicated to Black American studies. So if you watch Coates interviews, he'll say I was raised by a Black Panther. So part of the light that he's seeing things is from this family of origin. His mother was a teacher. He clearly comes from a household that is literate, right? They're not just reading, they are publishing, they are cultivating, they're curating. I mean, he grows up in this world of literature and reading and expressing ideas and turning those ideas into action. At the same time, and this is the thing that's I find kind of fascinating about Coates, and I think this is part of the light. If we want to use that poetry, the light from which he's seeing things, how he sees things.
Sure.
Coates has a view that's not anchored in any religion. He talks about this a lot. He talks about it in the book. Well, he talks about it in The World in Me. And it's important to understand, I think, that the book The World in Me, which has just been republished after a 10-year anniversary, and this book are kind of like part of a same narrative. Between The World and Me was a letter to his son. But the message is a response to his students. So this is a continued conversation. You know what I mean? And Coates has this thing about unraveling clean narratives, right? He's very skeptical about things. So he's not anchored in a religion. Um, he's rejected Afrocentric views. He has a constant fear of white supremacy and the ability to destroy black bodies. And he's like I said, he's anti-clean narratives. That includes Afrocentric thought. That's eventually gets to the any kind of ethnocentric based way of looking at anything, and against book bans. So he came out of a household where his parents rejected dogma, um, and and he comes from the Black Power movement. So he's grappling with multiple things as he's also investigating, reporting, reconciling, deconstructing, and taking very bold positions. At the same time, he doesn't have the typical, religious, ideological sort of foundation that you would think to give him the way that he takes such unequivocal moral positions. And he's counseled his students that the role of a writer is to save the world, change the world, save the world, advocate unequivocally, and he sees journalism as a way to pursue knowledge. So I know that's a lot, but I just thought it was important to um, to understand sort of the multiple layers that Coates is bringing to this project, because it's very interesting, it's very rich, and it does make you think about the various dynamics of, society and religion and upbringing on how you ultimately show up in the world and what positions you take. So
Yeah.
from that perspective, and a lot of perspective, he's an excellent writer. His books are a nice, clean read, and it's very thought-provoking all the time.
Yes, sir. I think you're right, Dawud, and thank you for that opening up into Coach Psyche, because I think that's very important. And in fact, that quotation that is done by our Lord just kind of lets you know that where you start does affect what you do in the world and where you end up. And I think that's what he's really trying to get to. His idea of pursuing journalism is to get to the truth of the matter. When you say and usually that truth doesn't lie with one set of people or a simple narrative, a simple statement. It really is a much more complicated on both sides and kind of nuanced. Would you agree or no?
I actually agree with that. And I think if you read anything that Coates writes, and particularly the message or Between the World and Me, he says that all along. He says repeatedly that he's skeptical of clean narratives. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like there's nuance and subtlety and in some cases outright um, gaslighting and what's the word? Subversion, or trying to ban various things, as it relates to trying to get to the truth of things. And so I think he's following, and other people have mentioned this, he's somewhat following in the tradition of James Baldwin, like from that perspective.
Yes, and I think he mentions James Baldwin in this text, or somewhere I read that yeah, Baldwin is very similar. You know, this is really kind of a fascinating read, only because Coates is so aware of the culture that has created his psyche, and he talks about it quite often, that we kind of grew up in this environment of white supremacy. And when he goes to Africa, when he goes to Senegal, he's very aware of that problem. So I wanted to just kind of get your view on Coates' view of Joshua Knott, because Knott was an anthropologist and a slave owner, and he read a lot of his work, one of which is very interesting. My niggerology, that's what it says. So far from harming me at home has made me greater man than I ever expected to be. And this is not view that he's writing about himself, actually.
Yeah.
What do you think about Coates bringing that to the text? I mean,
It's to me it's totally appropriate because
you
as
know,
I mentioned, Coates is he doesn't accept clean narratives.
mm,
And um, and just to help the viewers understand, Hosea Knott
yeah.
was a 19th century anthropologist. He was a epidemiologist. He was a slave owner and a so-called student of civilization.
Mm,
His chosen field of study was niggerology. Like we're not making this up, right? Niggerology, because as we know, every civilization on the planet has some form of slavery, right? Even today, slavery exists in some form in parts of the world. The American chattel slavery system that condemned one race of people for perpetual um, non-human status and chattel slavery forever was unique, right? So so in spite of the ability to implement this system, there was still a need to, I guess there was still some level of guilt or doubt or whatever. There was a need to prove it, quote unquote, scientifically. This kind of gets to the debunked eugenics type of way of looking at things. And
mm,
so Coates acknowledges this, and he rejects that in the same way he rejects Afrocentricity. He goes to Africa, and Ta-Nehisi, his name is derived from it's an ancient Egyptian term for the region of Nubia, often translated land of the black. So once again,
ah,
he comes from his father's from Philly.
mhm,
He has family roots from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which means that most of the people that came to Maryland came from the region of West Africa where there was a significant Muslim presence. He goes to Senegal, which has a rich Muslim, uh, Arabic history and a tradition of the jihad of the pen. He goes there, but by the time he gets there, he goes to Sheikh Anta Diop University, which is named after one of the foremost Afrocentric scholars. But he's already rejected that theory at Howard, but he also rejects the whole idea of niggerology. But he's still left grappling with when you don't believe in God, when you don't believe in Afrocentricity, you're not coming from a religious base. You're rejecting these clean narratives, whether they're racist or they're a response to racist ideas and niggerology to uplift what you're left with. And you see him grappling and trying to figure out what is the connection. Now, for us, and that's where I kind of laid it out that way. For Muslims, we would say, my goodness, my father's from Philly. I'm come from a black power culture and a Black Panther household. I have family from the Eastern Shore. My ancestors probably came from the region that I'm visiting right now, and I'm following in the footsteps of that Sufi Muslim tradition of the jihad of the pen, right? It would be very clear to us, right?
Right,
But
right.
it's not as clear to Ta-Nehisi.
Mhm.
So he's he said this is outrageous. It's not appropriate, it's not correct, but he's kind of feeling the same way about counter narratives as well. The counter narratives that come from Afrocentricity that were intended to combat niggerology and other races, whether even the religious doctrines that said African people are the children of Ham and they're are bound for perpetual slavery. So he rejects all that, and
Yeah.
that leaves him um, somewhat,
What
rejected.
tutelage?
Yeah, grappling, not accepting, but and just grappling with what does this mean for me, which is actually, I think, one of the fascinating tensions of his writing. One, the honesty of it. The honesty of, I don't have this religious foundation. I've rejected the Afrocentric and Black nationalist narrative. I don't believe in an ethno state, whether it's Israel or Liberia or
Yeah.
some other place. And I'm trying, and I'm uncomfortable with my African ancient Kemet derived name. I mean, he writes this, he says it,
Mhm.
and so I actually respect the honesty that he writes, and it's very thought provoking because honestly, all of us who've accepted the narrative that we are descendants of Africans, trafficked to for the most part to America as a result of the Atlantic slave trade, pulled from a region that include hundreds of ethnicities and language, stripped of that religious base, a lot of it being Muslims. We were either Muslims or followers of traditional African religions, and then made Negro. So you have to at some point answer the question, what does this mean? How did we get here? You know what I mean? And his parents gave him a framework to try to answer that he's still, from what I've read and listened to his interviews, that he's still grappling with.
Mhm.
So the
Mhm.
niggerology is, is another one of those clean narratives that he would just reject. And just as an aside,
Yeah.
I found on August 5th, 2020, the University of Alabama removed the name Josiah Knott from Knott Hall at the
That's
University
good.
of
That's a
Alabama.
good thing.
So just 6 years ago, they finally got around. they
Right, right. Yeah,
they
took a long
finally
time
got
to get
around to
there.
getting that man's name off of one of their buildings down there.
That is amazing. And so we're still working on this thing.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. It's definitely it's a work in process.
Yeah,
I think all this is within the context of we are moving towards the 250th anniversary of the country,
yeah,
and these dynamics are not new.
yeah, yeah.
The white supremacy and the various responses to white supremacy, whether they be political or religious or other or some combination of movements to it. Ta-Nehisi is just, in my mind anyway, this is just his version of it. You know what I mean? But this
Right,
is not new. As I tell people, this country has produced Quakers and Klansmen, right?
right,
It's
right.
produced both, right? We've had Quakers and Klansmen and everything in between. So
Yeah,
here
we
we go.
had Dr. King and Donald Trump. Yeah,
There you go. There you go.
yeah. I was just curious. I mean, he quotes a lot of writers. Obviously, there was a lot of writers that actually helped him with his liberation and growth. Do you agree with that, or?
Oh yeah, no. What I try to establish in my very long answer to your first question was that he comes from a literate family. I mean, like I said, they're reading, they're teaching, they're cultivating, they're curating, they're publishing. He
Mhm.
he grows up in this very dynamic, literate academic environment. You know what I mean? So we shouldn't be surprised to see him doing that way. He quotes in the book George Orwell, James Baldwin, Sonia Sanchez, Nora Erakat. I mean, just to name a few.
Yeah.
And to kind of bring it back to the first quote, one of the quotes from the book in the book is that from James Baldwin, he said, "Though we do not wholly believe it yet, the interior life is the real life, and the intangible dreams of people have a tangible effect on the world." And I think Coates included that quote in addition to the one from the poet earlier because Quotes does make the argument that narratives have the power of shaping reality. That's why
Yes.
negative narrative, positive narratives, whatever they are, you know what I mean? They have the ability to shape reality. So he's very tuned into that.
Yes, I think that's right. He mentions that quite a few times in his book. Post also wrote, "What is being learned by students is not just the facts they memorize, but the purpose of this knowledge." Um, this is, I think, what he's getting to the failure of our educational system. And they do cause students to memorize a lot of data, but don't teach them to rationally think through the process and to understand the difference between knowledge and not having knowledge. So the purpose of this knowledge, what does he mean by that?
Well, I Coach does question that, right? I mean, as you kind of alluded to, he questions that, and you get the impression that he believes despite the stated purpose of knowledge or the education system, is really for people to conform. And then he quoted a book or a reference from an author by the name of Paul Freire. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name properly, but it says he compared the education system to a banking system. He said the more completely students accept the passive way of learning imposed on them, the more they tend to simply adapt to the world as it is and to the fragmented view of reality deposited to them. So he's Coates, I think, sort of has this belief that the educational system is there to help you conform, but not to think.
Right.
It's the opposite of critical thinking, and of course, that's the opposite of his the mantra that he charged to his students, which is the purpose of well, probably all of his teaching and instruction and writing, but the stated thing that he wrote in the message to his students was your mission is no less than to transform the world. So he also talked about some challenges that he had personally in the education system with different learning styles and the inability for the
Yeah.
system to adapt to different learning styles. So he's skeptical
Yes,
that
you really think
about
that you
the
should be in the field rather than having someone lecture to you all day.
right.
And I think that's very interesting. And he has a problem with the notion of white supremacy inside of the educational system, which is number six. It says that the fact is that I have been in a safe space like Harvard all my life, and they were essential in the necessary process of confronting a literature confused with white supremacy. Um, I think that was right. Even my going to um, my high school, which was George Washington High School, and the teachers there took a particular effort to try to decouple the American narrative from what was being taught in the schools to what it actually was. You know, I mean, we were sitting in a segregated school because the system was trying to segregate us instead of a system of equality and equal rights and all that, equal education. The system was segregating and diminishing people as we were going through the system. I think that and they just talked about the glory of the white founding fathers and never mentioned the hundreds and hundreds of slaves that they owned, which was in contradiction to what they were writing about in the Constitution of the United States. So what are your views? I mean, you think that Coase is right that we're trying to fight through this notion of white supremacy and in our educational system?
Oh yeah, in society. I mean it's Black History Month. This is
Yeah.
starting to be a little bit of a pattern that you interview me during Black History Month.
Yeah,
I don't know if
yeah.
you're,
Yeah.
I don't know if you're doing that on purpose or not, but
Yeah.
I'm okay with that, right? Is that but that's the whole purpose of the various emphasis months: Black History Month, Pacific Islander Heritage Month, Latin American Month, Women's History Month. It is that, these heritage months and these history is that we are generally on a trajectory with a Eurocentric sort of way of looking at things.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, within that general way of looking at things, it's helpful to interject. Let's not forget um, these areas of history that are actually integrally connected.
Mhm.
Now, having said that, I'll give a plug. I do think after listening to you now, where was the high school you went to? You were
George
going to
Washington Carver, yeah, George Washington Carver.
in what city and state?
That is in Philadelphia, Virginia, or Martinsville area.
Okay, so that's down south. So I'm from the
Down
north. I'm
south.
from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And so when I was coming up, um, I was coming up on the heels of the Black Power movement in Philadelphia. So
Mm.
our history was different, like
Yes,
it
no
was
question.
it was very empowering. It was very integrated. I mean, we sang, I remember at one point, we sang the Pledge of Allegiance and
And the
right after
Negro
that,
anthem.
sang Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Yeah, yeah,
So
we did too. Yes,
right,
yes.
right. So it was part of it, but I agree with that, and I think that if I can give another plug, if people who haven't watched it, watching Kim Burns' series on the American Revolution, I think is very helpful with
Mhm.
that because he doesn't shy away from what you kind of call the contradictions of the expressed values of the Declaration of Independence. But I do want to say this: people tend to stop at the kind of the top of it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. Of course, that meant white landowning
Yeah,
men.
yeah.
And we ignore that even in that document, they disparage the Native American population. So
Mm.
we tend to stop and start there and forget, even in that document, they're doing that. And I also say that it's part of the history of the country that the Constitution was ultimately ratified in
Mm.
1788, I believe, 1788, but 1790,
Mhm.
the United States issued the Naturalization Act, which required citizenship to be a free white person.
Right.
So I think the reality is, and I've said this, that the Constitution had the three-fifths compromise.
Mm.
At the same time that Southerners saw black folks, or yeah, black people as chattel, as property, there was a political compromise to count three-fifths of those of that population for voting purposes. When you couple that, that's the Constitution. You couple the disparaging of the Native Americans in the Declaration of Independence. When you look at 2 years after the ratification of the Constitution, there's the Naturalization Act of 1790. You just kind of I've just come to the conclusion that America is like three-fifths racist. It's three-fifths racist. Because, like I said before, this these dynamics are not new. They're baked into the DNA of the country, and you can't you yes, we've had racists, but you can't ignore that there have been Quakers and abolitionists and others. So there's some kind of that three-fifths number has become a bit of a weighted average for me, to just talk about the dynamics that are in this country. So that's, once again, that's the long answer to yes, I agree with what he's saying. I do understand. He used the term safe spaces
Yeah,
at Howard University and other kind of all black environments, but
yeah.
the reality is that these racial dynamics are a part of our DNA, and they just sort of flare up and at different times, but they never go away because this is, in my mind, this is who we are.
Now he calls it a flaming cross, which is interesting. He says that we live under a class of people who rule American culture with a flaming cross for so long that we regularly cease to notice the import of their rule at all. Is Coach writing about a condition that you know about, which you just got through stating, really, or is something of his imagination? But I think he's right. I think that we tend to think about that if it's white is right and if black is not, it's not so good. But I think that when Colt goes to Senegal, and I think when he goes to Israel, I think he's carrying this weight on his in his mind, and he's assessing the political situation of those countries and the environment of those countries through that lens. And I don't think he has no choice, but he is trying to get to a truth that I really think that he does make it in terms of seeing the problems of Israel, for example, as being not only genocide, but a crime against humanity in written large. That we are all affected by what is happening there. People who are sitting there watching it happen, people who is happening to, this evil of genocide, and the whole world who's just simply watching it. We're all being affected by it, and we're all going to pay a price for it. And I think he's right about that. I think that he's heading us in the need for an urgency to change the situation.
Yeah, I think so let me see. That was a couple. The only thing I'll say about that, because that was a couple things in there in
Yes.
your statement there. I'll just say that Coates is skeptical of ethnocentric solutions and states and things like that. He's skeptical of that idea. He believes in democracy. Once again, he's not carrying. I mean, some people who support what's happening, the genocide that's been validated by numerous
Yes.
civil human rights organizations, including human rights organizations in Israel, right? So it's not just all over. Coates doesn't have a religious basis to rationalize that. You know what I mean? There's not a chosen people idea that, he's not going to, based on his writing, I don't think he wrote this, or maybe he did write this, he's not going to endorse the idea of manifest destiny. I mean, did the United States have the right to exist as it also meant the genocide of the native populations, the colonization, genocide of native population, and the implementation of a chattel slavery system unknown to at least modern recorded history. You know what I mean? Like that's the question. So yeah, he's not making that up. And as I kind of hinted at, we're at a point where we're right now, as we head into the 250th anniversary of the country, we're seeing the effects of a portion of the population being threatened by the idea that we may tip to a minority white population, and
Right.
that's creating this anxiety and to me is just activating the elements in our cultural and sociological and psychological DNA that have always been there, and that are that you can track through legislation. Like I said, the Naturalization Act of 1790, and even in the 1920s, there were immigration acts in the 1920s that limited immigration to European and white countries. And we have people. I know there was one of my favorite cases. There was an Indian, a person of India, not a Native American, Indian from India, who went to court challenging these definitions of whiteness and Caucasian. He said, "I'm Caucasian because some Indians consider themselves Caucasians."